Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Emma Bamford, who is a thriller author. She has also written several nonfiction books, and she is from Britain. So this is a thrill for us having her here. And for readers unfamiliar with your work, could you please explain what it is exactly that you write?
Hi, Selena. Yeah.
Hi.
So my debut thriller is called Deep Water, and it's a suspense story set on an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And the book opens with a sea captain. He's at sea, and one of his crew knocks on his door in the middle of the night and says, "Captain, we're picking up something on radar." So he gets out of bed and he goes down, and they look on the radar, and then they hear a mayday call from a sailing vessel, and this is like thousands of miles from anywhere. So it's a woman, and she says her husband's badly injured, and so the captain and his crewmate go to her yacht to see what's going on. And she seems to be really traumatized. Her husband is really badly injured. He's unconscious and he's bleeding out. And so they bring the pair of them back to their ship so they can take care of the husband. And the captain starts to interview the woman. She's called Virginie. And he wants to get to the bottom of how she's ended up adrift in the middle of nowhere with her husband injured and in this kind of really ramped up, crazed state. And so then she starts to tell him about their experiences. And just before she starts to relate it, she says, "It's all my fault, I've killed them all." And then we jump back in time and we learn about her and her husband taking a trip by sailboat, a kind of extended honeymoon to this paradise island that they'd heard of, and then what happened to them from there.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. I want to hear what happens. So, what was the inspiration for Deep Water?
Well, when I was in my early 30s, I felt like I was stuck in a bit of a rut, and I did this really crazy thing to shake things up. And I answered an advert on the internet for Crew Wanted, and I bought a one-way ticket to Borneo to live on a boat with a man that I'd never met and his cat. And quit my job, rented out my flat, sold my car, went all in for this adventure. I'd never done anything like it before in my life. Well, my people used to say to me, "You're brave or you're crazy." They were the kind of two things that they would say. And sometimes people would say to me, "Have you seen the film Dead Calm?" They were the ones who said, "Or you're crazy." I don't know if you remember that film. It's got Nicole Kidman in it and Billy Zane, and it's a couple sailing on a boat, and they come across, have a run-in with a ne'er-do-well, let's say, at sea. And luckily that didn't happen to me, because here I am, alive to tell the tale. But I had a couple of years living on boats and sailing around the world and going to some really remote and very beautiful places. And when I was away, I kind of started to think, oh, maybe this would be a good idea for a thriller, because it's kind of like a locked room. You know the term locked room mystery, and that's traditionally a sort of Agatha Christie kind of house where everyone's in a house and there's been a murder. Well, if you think of an island, it's a bit like a locked room or a house like that. You've got a set group of characters, and they're in this place. And then also, if it's a remote island, you've got the pressures of resources. So imagine like it's really hot, and you're living on a small boat, and it's really claustrophobic, and you have an argument with your husband, and you can't get away from him because you're living in this really tight-knit community, and everyone's involved with everybody else's business. So Deep Water is a novel, but it was based on some of my experiences when I was away traveling on the high seas. And then my two non-fiction books, which are called Casting Off and Untie the Lines, they are travel memoirs. So they're non-fiction books about my time at sea.
Ah, so what kind of research did you have to do? I know you said a lot of it was based on your experiences, but what kind of research did you have to do for this novel, for Deep Water?
Um, yeah, all kinds of things. I spoke to a doctor who deals in emergencies in remote places, like up mountains and in remote locations, about what would happen if there was a medical emergency when you were days or weeks away from anywhere. I spoke to really, really random things. I emailed a person who sold spear guns to ask him to describe what sound a spear gun would make if you fired it in the air, not in the water. I did more sailing, so that I could, remember the feeling. I watched videos of people climbing up coconut palms in Fiji to see how that was done. I didn't try it myself, but I learned how to open a coconut with a machete. So basically, and scuba diving. I tried scuba diving as well, because one of my characters' version, he goes scuba diving for the first time.
It sounds like your research is a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was.
So what is your favorite research story?
That's a really good question and a really hard one to answer. I suppose the whole sailing trip, because I was away for 2 to 3 years. I had to keep coming back to earn a bit of money every now and then. But that whole enormous life experience and life-changing experience of going and living at sea, and learning about this small community. They call them cruisers. So they are people who they may have a yacht and live on it full time. So they might be empty nesters and their kids have grown up and they've retired and they've always wanted to sail. So they rent out, or they sell their home and they buy a boat, and then they go off and travel the world, and then they learn to be fairly self-sufficient and learn all these skills like engineering and fishing and navigation and sailing by the stars. So when I was away living on the boats and sailing, I learned about this group of people that I would have never ever come across in my normal day-to-day life, because I'm from the East Midlands, is where I grew up in the UK, which is about as far away from the sea as you can get in this country. And then spent a lot of my working life living in London, which is not near the sea either. So yeah, I also got to race across the Atlantic Ocean, which is a very good experience. And again, that went into the book as well.
So what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out Deepwater?
I didn't really know what kind of a book I was writing. So I had an idea of a setting. So I think I'm learning that when it comes to my fiction work, the concept of the setting comes first, and the mood, the feeling. So I knew I wanted to write a book set on an island. I knew I wanted there to be some sailors. I knew that I wanted there to be a couple, and they became Jake and Virginie, the main characters. But apart from that, I didn't know what kind of book it was. I was just writing scenes and having fun, and in a way kind of living vicariously on this island with these characters that I'd created in my head. And then at some point it kind of had to become some sort of a novel. And then I had to think about genre and where it would sit on a bookshelf in a bookshop. And a few years ago, I once again quit my job, but this time I went back to university and I did a master's degree in creative writing. And when I was on that, I took this manuscript with me, and that's when I started to really think about what kind of a book I wanted it to be. And then there was a lot of rewriting and shaping and creating a beginning and a middle and an end, and trying to make it into a novel rather than just bits of a story that were on my computer.
So did you actually come up with an outline first, or did you kind of let the characters take you where they wanted to go?
Yeah, a bit of both. Have you heard these terms? Are you familiar with the terms plotters and pantsers? I don't know if that's me.
Oh, yeah. I was going to ask you if you were a pantser or a.
So yeah. I would say I'm more of a pantser on the first draft, but then I go back and then I think about the structure and then try and take what I've got and make it more of a plot, fit the way that I've decided that I want it to go. Because I think you learn a lot when you're writing, and sometimes, I mean, I've heard other writers say it as well. Characters just do things that surprise you, or things go off in a different direction, or you become aware of themes or ideas that you didn't even know that you had through the writing. I've heard of some writers who create spreadsheets to begin with, and they, like, you know, the enormous table of what's going to happen in each scene, who's going to be in it, how they're going to change, what's going to happen. And I'd love to be able to do that, but I don't think I can hold all that in my head in one go to be able to put it down on the paper. So yeah, it's a bit of both.
So, was there one character that you loved or hated the most in the book?
There are two characters that there are three characters that I love, actually. And they are Stella, who becomes Virginie's best friend when they arrive on the island. Stella's already there. She's there with her husband, Pete. They're from Canada, and they had like blue chip jobs, and they gave them up. And then now they just travel around the world looking for beautiful places. And then there was Captain Tenku, who is the naval captain who comes across Jake and Virginie at the beginning of the novel. And he is a hero character, but he doesn't realise that he's a hero, so he's very grounded. And the other favourite character is the dog Gus, who I had a lot of fun writing, and he has makes facial expressions all the time with his eyebrows and things.
Okay, that's great.
And the character that I dislike the most from a personal standpoint, there's two. So one would be Vitor, who is the villain of the piece, for obvious reasons. But the other would be Virginie sometimes. Virginie and Jake. So they are the protagonists of the story. But I didn't want them to be, I wanted them to be a bit more real and to be flawed people. So sometimes they do things, and even me as the person who's created them, like, wants to shake them and say, why are you doing that? You're crazy. But, you know, if they just stayed at home and not done anything, made any silly decisions, then it wouldn't have been a very good, interesting story.
True. Okay. So what else can we expect from you in the near future?
Well, I am working on another suspense. It's called Eye of the Beholder. Hopefully it'll be out next year. And I don't know how much I'm allowed to tell you, but I can probably tell you a tiny bit. So it is a reworking of Hitchcock's film Vertigo. And it's about a heartbroken ghostwriter who tries to turn a man into the image of her dead lover.
Hey, you shouldn't tell us too much about it.
No, I won't say anything else. It's a big difference, because I've written 3 books about sailing and tropical places, and there's no boats. There's a little bit of water because it's set in Scotland by a loch, but yeah, nothing to do with boats, nothing to do with sailing, and it's cold most of the time.
Right. But Deepwater is actually your debut fiction book.
Yes.
And have you decided that you're going to keep writing suspense books, thriller books?
I don't know. I have lots of different ideas all the time. I do like reading suspense and crime, which is probably why I was as led to write those to begin with. But yeah, I'm open to other ideas and other possibilities. I'm thinking for the next one after that, I might do something historical. But I think it would have a similar kind of crime bent to it.
Interesting. Okay. Now I have questions for you about being a writer. What's your favorite part about being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
Okay. That would be when I'm in the flow, which anyone who writes probably knows that doesn't happen all the time. A lot of the time it can or some of the time, let's say, it can feel like a real drag, like the words aren't coming, or you might have writer's block, or you might be riddled with self-doubt. But the times when those things switch off and you're just in the scene and there's just a movie going in your head, and you're just a conduit to get that movie out of your head and onto the paper or onto the computer. I write on a laptop. That's amazing. I mean, I think that's a very similar feeling to reading a book and getting lost in the story, or when you're watching a film and you're really there, and then something shocking or happens, or someone jumps out in the film, and you at home in your living room do that. Yeah, I think when you're really in the flow of writing, it's a really similar feeling.
So when you're writing, do you actually see the characters in front of you and like a film?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I can imagine it's like that. And I that's a really that would be a really interesting thing to see the characters in a movie. And
Yeah.
do you see your book possibly being made into a movie?
Well, I'd love it.
Yeah, I know that.
Who wouldn't? But yeah, I mean, if that happens, that would be wonderful. But when I read somebody else's, novel by other people, I see those as a movie in my head as well. The scenes come to life as a picture in my head, which I've only recently learned that not everybody has that when they read. People's brains work in all different kinds of ways, and not everybody pictures the movie. And I think, oh, if my brain didn't work like that, would I be able to write? Would I love reading novels as much as I do? I'm not sure.
Interesting. Okay. Now, what do you consider the most challenging part of the whole writing process, and how do you overcome that?
So psychologically, I would say self-doubt, and going hand in hand with that is the idea of this enormous thing, because a novel manuscript is, say, the one I'm working on at the moment, it's 110,000 words, which is a little bit too long. But I've got, like I think I said this earlier, I've got to hold all of this in my head, because if I change something here, then that's got a ripple effect all the way through the whole manuscript, and what could happen to different characters, not just something from as small as someone's hair color to the implications of the outcomes of a decision that they've made. So sometimes it can feel like this massive, impossible, overwhelming task, which I think leads to the self-doubt. And I think the way of dealing with that is to pretend that that's not the case, and just break it down into very, very small things. Like I want to do a list of all the things to do with this character, or check how many times I've used that particular word or this kind of image, or just make it small, manageable tasks, and then just go through them and go through them and go through them methodically, and then finally get to the end.
Okay. So what has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
I apart from going off on my travels, the most exciting moment for me was when I got a call from an agent saying that there was a publisher in America who was interested in publishing Deepwater. And it was during COVID, it was during lockdown, and I was a mature student, and I was living in student accommodation. So just had a bedroom basically, and a shared kitchen, and obviously because of COVID, trying not to mix with anybody. And it was a difficult time. My cat had just died. It was really sad. And I got this phone call, and she said, she speaks really quickly, my agent, and she said, "Raw," and I was like, "Sorry, could you repeat that?" And she said, "Yes, there's a publisher in America, and they'd like to publish Deepwater, And so they've offered to do that. And if you're happy, we'll say yes. And then that's it, you're getting published. And it was just this astonishing moment, which is crazy because I'd been published twice before, although never in the States. And there was this whole process that I'd been through to get to that point. But I never knew that it was definitely going to happen because there's so much rejection in the publishing industry and the whole writing process. So it was just the surrealist moment. Yeah, and I rang my parents, and then my dad, I hope he doesn't watch this because it'll embarrass him. My dad, he was out, they live in the countryside, and he was outside, and he said a little blue-tip bird had just landed on the grass in front of him while he was talking to me when I told him my news, and was doing a little dance of joy, which is another surreal moment. But yeah, that's definitely up there with the top memories.
Wow. Okay. So what is the greatest lesson that you've learned in your writing career?
To keep going. I mean, when I first started writing Deepwater, I didn't know what I was doing because I'd never written fiction before. I work as a journalist, so fairly familiar with newspaper writing, magazine writing, and then having written the non-fiction books, but I'd never written fiction before. And I started writing, and I joined a local writing group, and I remember going to a meeting and being nervous and reading out a passage, and then went around the room and everyone gave their comments, and one person in the room said, "Oh, it's fine, but nothing happens." And I thought, oh, she's right, nothing does happen. Okay, let's take that away. That's a lesson to be learned. And so little things like that. So like I said, there's always rejection. So rejected by agents or publishers or competitions that I entered for works in progress, that kind of thing. And sometimes I get longlisted, sometimes I wouldn't, sometimes I get shortlisted, sometimes I wouldn't. But I never gave up on the idea of that novel. So I just kept going with it, and I just kept changing it and changing it and changing it. A lot of the centre of Deepwater, the action that happens on the island, has stayed the same. But the characters have changed, the motivations have changed, the structure of the whole novel has changed, the kind of genre that it sits in has changed. So I was just determined that I wanted to keep going. I think partly that comes from being a journalist, because when you work for a newspaper that's publishing every day, then pretty much most things that you write tend to get used, but they get rewritten and rewritten and rewritten before they get published. So that was probably a good grounding. But yeah, resilience and tenacity, really important.
Being a journalist, that must have been tough, rewriting, but it has to be done that day.
Yeah, but it's not, usually you don't rewrite it, somebody else does. So yeah, so that was very different when I came to publishing, because I was used to writing something and then handing it in, and then someone else refines it and makes it better, fact checks it, writes the headline, everything like that. You just pass it down the line. It's a bit like a production factory, because it's all got to happen so quickly, so you have a lot of people doing smaller tasks of work, if that makes sense, through the day. Whereas in book publishing, it's not like that at all. You're like, what? It needs redoing, and I've got to redo the whole thing. Oh, okay then.
Or you do have some help from an editor, I hope, or your agent, right?
Yeah. They don't actually make the changes though. They just make suggestions, and then
suggestions.
I still have to do the work. Yeah. It makes me sound really lazy. I don't mean it that way.
So that must have been quite a change for you.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what piece of advice would you want to share with other writers?
To never give up. I think to learn as much as you can about, well, that's what I did, and it seems to have worked out okay for me. So to learn as much as you can about the writing process, about the craft, about the reality of writing, about the publishing process. So I read loads of different books on craft. I listen to podcasts where writers, and I still do, where writers are interviewed about how they work or what their routine is. And there's always like a little gem of something that you can take and you can squirrel away, or there might be a parallel between what they're saying and your own experience. I joined writing groups and had people critique my work, and I critique their work. And actually, you learn an awful lot from reading other people's work as well. It can be inspiring, and at the same time, you can learn what is working and what isn't working in their work as well as your own. Short courses, YouTube videos, basically just researched and learned as best I could how to do it, and then had a go. But obviously the best way of learning is by doing, and then redoing and redoing and redoing.
Okay. And are there any clubs, groups, or organizations that you'd recommend to other writers that might have helped you in your career?
Yeah, I joined some groups on Facebook. So reading groups, there's one called the Book Club. Most of mine are British based. And that's where people recommend books that they've read. But when you see the comments that people are making about other books, you learn things there. And there's a group called the Savvy Writers Group on Facebook as well, which is a networking group for published writers. It's kind of it's not necessarily networking, it's more like support. So people can ask questions or raise issues that they might have come across, or share their successes or their frustrations. And that's always quite useful. And I follow a lot of writers on Twitter, and it's always interesting to see what other people have to say and what they're going through as well. Generally, if you follow one person on Twitter, then or whatever social media, then obviously others similar will get suggested, and then suddenly you're following a lot of accounts that can help.
Hey, thank you. Now, questions about you as a person. What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
I could tell you some really random things. That I'm a black belt in Taekwondo.
Ooh.
That I have eaten fruit bat, and that I have a phobia of dogs.
Phobia of dogs?
Ever since I was a toddler.
Did a dog bite you or something at one time?
I don't think so. I remember being chased by one, but apparently I've had hypnotherapy, and apparently you can learn a phobia. It doesn't necessarily come from experience. So I think maybe that's what happened in my case. My parents can't remember me ever being bitten.
Wow, interesting. That's why you had a cat.
Yep.
Okay.
He bites me all the time, but I'm fine with that.
So what questions do you wish interviewers would ask you, and what would your answer be?
Oh my word. That is a really, really hard question.
Yes, it is.
About the writing process or about myself?
Anything.
What would my alternative career be?
And what would your answer be?
Music video director.
Really?
Yeah. I always wanted to do it. If I listen to a song in the car on the radio, then I know music videos aren't as big now as they were when I was younger, but going back to the movie in the head, I picture the whole, what's happening, what people are wearing, what kind of setting it is, what season it is, what's going on. And then sometimes I would then see the actual music video afterwards on the TV, and it would be completely different. I'd be like, what are they doing? That music video doesn't fit the lyrics or the music or anything.
Oh,
basically
wow.
Like mini books, I think, really.
It's interesting. Wow. You probably would be very good at it if you see all the visuals in front of you.
Yeah, I always like the narrative music videos particularly.
But yeah, writing is good too. We need you to stick to writing.
Yeah, it's less expensive, and also I don't know any pop stars, so that's holding me back.
Makes sense. So what is or are your passions when you're not writing, and how do you make time to do the things that you love?
Well, sailing, although I don't do that so much now, because of where I live. Um, but before I would go sailing several times a year and often on weekends as well. I don't have a boat, but I'd find somebody that would let me come and lend a hand on theirs. I love to travel. Um, and then apart from that, the normal kinds of things like hang out with my friends, spending time with my family, reading, going to the gym. Yeah, nothing massively groundbreaking, I'm afraid.
Well, those are fine. Nothing wrong with that. And so what does your writing space look like? And what do you need to have with you when you're writing or editing?
Okay, so at the moment, my writing space is a complete mess because I'm having some building work done.
Uh,
So everything has come out of that room into this room, but I think I've set it up fairly well so that it looks okay behind me. But normally, so my computer is on a desk. I've got windows in front of me that look out onto a park. And I have got books around me. There's an old fireplace, so in the winter, sometimes I have a fire going in there. I've got a map of a chart of the Indian Ocean on the wall, which is to remind me of my travels, and that's also where Deep Water was set. And then I've got various trinkets and things. I don't know if you can see, there's a bit of a picture behind me that was picked that up in Senegal on a trip there last year. And there's a little ship in a bottle that my literary agency gave me when Deep Water was published. So it's a little boat, and it says Wayfinder, which is the name of Jake and Virginie's yacht. It's got that written on a little flag inside a tiny bottle like this. I still don't know how they get those in there. And as for things that I have to have with me, a cup of tea and a Spotify playlist. So whatever novel I'm working on at the time, I create a playlist that suits the mood. So it's going back to the music video director again, isn't it? So I'm doing it the other way around, creating a soundtrack for the novel. And then I just run that on repeat while I'm writing. It's kind of a way to trick me into getting down to work.
So you listen to music when you're writing rather than silence.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what type of music is it?
It's electronica, things like Moby, or piano music. Yeah, nothing that's like no pop ballads or anything that's going to distract me, so I'm going to start singing along. But things that definitely have a mood to them.
Okay, so it's instrumentals,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. And writers very often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to help them with their work. And you just mentioned something about a little furry thing. Do you
Yep.
still have one?
Yeah, I
Or
do. So after my first cat sadly died, I adopted another one, and his name is Tom Tom. And he often comes and sits on the chair next to me, and he has a snooze until he gets bored and when he wants attention. He did it yesterday. So my arm's on the desk, on the mat, holding the mouse, working, and he jumps on the desk and puts both front paws on my hand so that I can't use my mouse and can't do any work. And then I know it's time to take a break and go and feed him or play with him or something.
my cat sometimes uses me as a scratching post when he wants attention,
Wow.
when I'm zooming sometimes even. Oh, that's great though. Okay, now I have two more questions for you.
Yeah.
Where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And I know
Yes.
I've seen your book at Annie's. And you can get Deepwater at Annie's Bookstop of Worcester. If you call us at 508-796-5613, or if you email us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. And where else can people find your books?
As they say in all good bookstores. There's also an audiobook version, which if you're into audio, I'm getting increasingly into audiobooks now, actually. They're good when you're walking around. And I really enjoyed listening to that, particularly the actor who reads Captain Tenku's part. It's very dramatic.
Oh, wonderful. And how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
So I am on Facebook as Emma Bamford Writes, on Instagram as Emma V Bamford, and on Twitter as Emma V Bamford as well.
And
have
you
a
also,
website,
yeah, website.
Website emmabamford.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And
Thanks for having me.
it was a pleasure. And maybe someday we'll see you across the pond at
Yeah,
at our store, since you love to travel.
Yep.
Well, thanks very much, Emma
Thank
Bamford.
you.